Hey, welcome to the Nerditorium. My name is Dinkar. With me is my best friend and ally Jishnu Guha. Hey Jishnu, what's up? How do you do?
What's the difference between a best friend and an ally?
Well, you'd help me in a crime, I assume. If we're gonna rob a bank, I can. You're part of the Dinkars too, much like in Ocean's 11. Are you in?
If I was your best friend, I'd tell you you're making a terrible mistake, and then I'd help you. But I would let you know.
So that's why I had to specify you're a best friend and an ally. Okay, how about you be my alibi, not an ally? All you have to do is when you get the call from the cops, say, "What? He was with me the entire time. We were having dinner."
Then I'm gonna get taken to the police station and be given the good cop, bad cop treatment. You know, like I bruise like a peach. I'll crumble, like a pie.
Okay, fine. We're gonna stick to best friend then, Jishnu,
Cool.
and we'll rethink this ally alibi situation. But I'm here to talk to you about something very important, man. Did you know there are still movies coming out in God's Green 2020?
It is a greener, 20 isn't it? 2020.
It's
I don't know if they're more movies.
It is, it
The
is.
movies thing I don't know so much about, but I feel like it is a little greener. Maybe because there are fewer movies being
It
made.
is. That's mostly because nature is healing and we are the virus. But let's forget about that and talk about movies. We're here to talk about two movies that have been put off multiple times because of the coronavirus pandemic, but are now finally here in various mediums, and we have seen them in various mediums that we will not speak of. Uh, so let's start with Mulan. Tell me about Mulan, Jugs.
So when Mulan came out in '98, I wasn't on the hype train as much, and I distinctly recall having been in at Disney World. I was there with my family for a vacation. I would have been probably like 9 or 10 years old, and I missed the movie in theaters. I just somehow just did, and I wound up at Disney World, living large. Couldn't believe my luck. Everything was amazing, especially being at that age at Disney World. Everything was magical. And then they have the Disney parade, which they do every night, I think, at the Magic Kingdom. And because Mulan came out, that was my first point of reference for what the hell Mulan even was. I'm walking down the street, I'm like, "Sup, Mickey? Sup, Goof? Hey, Plute? How's it going? Holy crap, that's a dragon." And then I saw the whole cast and people parading about in fireworks, and it was magical. And the songs were nice too. I then went home, I saw the movie, I said, "Wow, I wish I had more context," because that just felt like a fever dream and I didn't know what I was looking at. But hey, it's a great movie. I found out later.
It is.
This one, not the best, but it's not as bad as people seem to say.
I think what worked about the old animated Mulan was the humor and the music
Yep.
to a large extent.
Yep.
And both of those have been very deliberately removed from
Yep.
this movie. Rather than thinking of this as a remake of the animated Mulan, maybe it makes more sense to think of it as
Its
a
own movie, yeah.
movie that draws from the same source material.
Exactly. It's apples and oranges, and I think everybody who's seen the original is going to be very aware of the fact that like this particular story isn't like the story itself isn't why I fell in love with the movie, which is kind of true, unfortunately, for most of the Disney animated classics. I mean, the magic in them is not necessarily about the actual narrative; it's about the whimsical fantasy of the songs and the beautiful colors and
That's
the,
true.
the imagination. But what I will say is, I think by and large, the internet seems to not be the biggest fan of this movie. I'll admit it took me 2 sittings to get
Yeah.
through it because it wasn't very compelling. I'll admit the only reason I came back to it is because I said to myself, well, you know what, it is a Disney movie, so I guess there is potential. But like 25% of the way through, I kind of guessed, even, this is going to sound weird to say, I guessed the ending even though we know how the original movie ends. But I know that it's not exactly the
Right.
same movie, right? Because it's not a musical, it's not there isn't a dragon, the antagonists have been muddled up a little bit. You have the character who is kind of the live action version of him, but then there's a witch now, and she's the more imaginative, whimsical kind of character. Point is, I threw it a very big bone simply because it's Disney and because the original movie is as good as it is. That being said, I don't think it's
Yeah.
as bad as people say it is, but it's still not great. The point is, it's a solid 5 on 10. It's basically an
I would call
action
that
movie.
bad.
It's an. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
It's not great. I wouldn't watch it again.
It's a okay.
But
Let me I think the overwhelming sense I got while watching this movie and the general feel of it uh, is that it is really, really dull.
Yeah.
And for an action movie,
Yeah.
that's a pretty damning fault to have.
Yeah.
It's not bad. It's stunning to look at
Yeah.
in parts.
Mhm.
Some of the set pieces work well.
Sure.
Some of them are kind of like confused or like not particularly interesting, I would say.
Yep.
But overall, just kind of dull and draggy, which
Yeah.
is a shame.
It is.
It's not outright terrible, that I agree with.
Mhm.
But I can see the reaction being pretty annoyed
Yeah.
for multiple reasons. A, because like people had a lot of expectations for this movie.
Yep.
And secondly, I think is the Disney of it all. There's a couple of there's in fact 2A is the fact that Disney has made this movie in a very calculated, deliberate manner to kind of appeal to the Chinese audience who didn't like the original Mulan.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of shows. So it's like you're trying to tell a country, hey, look, this movie is about you. You like it, right? You like this, don't you? It's not an ideal approach to making movies,
Yeah.
and I don't think they've quite nailed it either. So it kind of ends up in like an odd position, firstly. And secondly, just politically, that's kind of a messy situation to get into.
It's a movie made with a lot of agenda, which is very, very evident and obvious. And if the number one, for me personally, if your number one agenda isn't a story that is really, really compelling and needs to be told, then everything else secondary to that, if that gets put out at number one, then you're already starting off on a bad foot as far as I'm concerned. And that's the case with any of these Disney remakes. You add on this political aspect to it. Obviously, that's only doing more damage than good. And basically, yep, it didn't stick the landing. But it was kind of pretty to look at some points. But that's been
I think that's
just
one.
the money at this point. That's Disney having money to like make pretty looking things. But
Production design was good.
Yeah.
Is I guess what we're saying.
Yeah.
I think there were some interesting threads actually that I wish
Like
they
what?
had dealt with in a better way. I think the witch was actually a good character to add. This idea of a character who ends up on the other side of the battle of good and evil
Mhm.
because of like the same situation as Mulan
Yeah.
is interesting, right? Like that brings you onto a dark side, light side kind of situation. It's worth exploring.
Sure.
Unfortunately, it's not very much explored, which is kind of a shame. It just kind of gets knocked off in one conversation at the end.
Yeah.
And this kind of arc they try to build for the witch lady doesn't quite. It never feels justified. It just feels like, right, we know what you're doing, and you kind of wrote down all the steps and did them.
Yeah.
So I think that was a shame. And I also actually thought that the villain this time was a little more compelling.
I
like-
think if this just wasn't a Mulan remake and they took what you said is very true. The witch was not bad, and so was this additional backstory to the main antagonist as well. If they just wrote their own damn movie with these elements in it and had a female protagonist who had a similar story of trying to overcome the oppressiveness of the patriarchy and all that kind of stuff, then it would have been fine. I think it would have been a better movie. It's just the fact that like when you're going into this, you're expecting the same feel-good feels of Mulan, and this didn't even try to do it, and therefore you're just going to upset your audience before you even begin. So just make your own damn movies, Disney. You can do it. I believe in you.
Okay, so give us a thumbs rating, Jugs.
I'm putting my thumbs sideways.
I see.
I said 5
Okay.
on 10. I don't know what
I
else
guess-
to give you.
You did give it a 5 on 10.
Yeah.
Alright, 5 thumbs
5
out of
thumbs.
10 thumbs. Standard thumb rating rules. Alright, now let's move on to a movie that I enjoyed far more. Bill and Ted Face the Music. The much awaited question mark third installment in the Bill and Ted franchise. The question mark because nobody really expected this movie to come back. Jugs, if I understand correctly, you have not seen either of the two Bill and Teds.
I neither know William nor Edward.
William is actually William S. Preston Esquire, and Ted is he's actually Theodore. He's not an Edward. He's Theodore Ted Logan.
Nice.
So Ted is Keanu Reeves. Billy is Alex Winter, who sounds a lot like Farhan Akhtar, especially in the third movie. Anyway, the premise, Jugs, I'm surprised you haven't seen this movie because it's a classic, right? It's your typical, it's a very specific kind of comedy that used to come out a lot back in the day, which is two dudes who believe in the power of rockin' to save the world. That's pretty much it.
I've,
You've got like
I've seen Pick of Destiny.
Wayne's World.
I think I was like, I got one.
Pick of Destiny, yeah, or like the original, the Tenacious D TV show, or like the entire concept of Tenacious D. Same thing. Rock can save the world. But Bill and Ted are part of this band called Wild Stallions. Well, they are Wild Stallions, and they can't play their instruments. But they're visited by an emissary from the future, played by George Carlin, who goes by the name Rufus, who tells them that they are going to write the song that will basically fix the world and bring all of it together in harmony. But basically, the first movie, they spend their entire time going back in history and collecting famous figures. So they go pick up Napoleon, they go pick up Socrates, or Socrates as they call him, and they bring all these guys back to the present to basically help them write their history report, which they have to write so that Ted doesn't flunk and get sent to military school, which means the band would split up, which means they would never write the song. Are you with me so far?
I love it. I love it. I also just want you to say the words rockin'
It's
dudes.
a classic.
Just say rocking dudes more. Just add it to your
Oh,
vocabulary.
I'm showing the rockin' fingers, Jugs. I'm bringing these back, by the way. We do rock fingers again. Basically, the Bill and Ted movies are not very good. They're highly average movies that are saved and that work. I really like them. But they're not objectively good movies by any stretch. They're saved and they work because of the charm and likability of Bill and Ted.
Sure.
Which is both because of the actors playing them and the general nature of the characters. They're just these like really positive dudes. Their entire motto is like party on, dudes.
Whoa.
I did the rock fingers again.
Are you
there.
saying that they're
Again,
basically Wayne and Garth?
essentially like high school versions at one point of Wayne and Garth?
Okay.
Be excellent to each other is their motto. How can you disagree with that? That's why these movies worked in the first place. They're just like really positive, nice movies.
Sure, yeah.
They're not stoners. They don't even drink. It's pretty cool.
Okay, so then cut to the chase. Unlike a Mulan and every other Disney remake before, did you want this next series in the franchise that nobody seemed to ask for? Are you happy it exists?
I didn't particularly expect it, and from what I understand, nobody particularly wanted to do it unless there was a really good reason to, because all of them have gone on to have their own careers. Keanu's done a couple of movies that people have heard of,
Sure,
apparently.
yeah, it seems like
So there was it wasn't like a cash grab, let's get the band back together kind of situation, like certain sitcoms that we have seen.
Yeah.
It was, apparently they just had a story that these guys are all friends. This was Keanu's breakout role, and I think it was the first break for all of them. So the two screenwriters and the two leads are basically just tight friends, and they came up with the story that they thought was really fun, and so decided to come back and make the movie. And then they put it out at a time when the world could really use some saving by some rockin' dudes.
I'm assuming
So that's why we're here.
that much like the Disney remakes, that this has like upped the ante with production value and money being thrown at it?
Not
Or is it
not by a huge amount. You can still see that it's a fairly low budget movie, but I will say that there's a clear update, right? Like Hell, when they went to it back in Bill and Ted 2, was basically a soundstage that was completely red,
Right.
and the devil was like a dude in heavy makeup,
Right.
as opposed to now where it's CGI and it looks pretty sick. So without getting into too many details, because I don't know how to explain all the details, I've already explained way too much.
You have.
Basically, it's a good movie. I enjoyed it. It's exactly the same as the first two Bill and Ted's in that, objectively speaking, it's kind of hokey. It doesn't make sense. It's kind of cheesy. It ends with a sequence where Jimi Hendrix, Louis Armstrong, and Kid Cudi, among others, are all playing the song that saves the world. And this isn't a spoiler because that's what the entire movie is based on. So it's cheesy in the best way, in that it's just like really positive and goofy.
Good.
I feel like it's not. There are some missed opportunities. Like I feel like it's not as funny as it could have been. And their daughters, Billy and Thea, who, by the way, are these two actors who I don't think I've seen before. These two girls who do a killer job of basically replicating young Keanu and young Alex Winter. And they're pretty great too. They don't have a lot to do. Basically, they go off and collect these historical figures like their fathers did in the first movie, while Bill and Ted themselves go visit future versions of themselves to try and steal the song from themselves that they're going to write. Does this make any sense?
No,
Jugs?
just stop talking now. So it sounds like
Let-
we would recommend Bill and Ted to you more than we would Mulan in 2020. You need a break from the drab, dreary reality of life. Bill and Ted
1,000%.
Bill and Ted seems like a great way to do that. Go watch that.
Let me
movie
put it
instead.
this way. Don't watch Bill and Ted 3 unless you've seen and enjoyed Bill and Ted 1 and 2. And if you haven't seen Bill and Ted 1 and 2 or 3, watch all three of them. They're fun. Thumbs diagonally pointing at each other and then slowly turning into a rock symbol. What? Yeah. This has been the Nerditorium.